All right, so today we're diving into 19th century Hong Kong.
Okay.
But we're not talking about, those iconic skyscrapers you imagine?
Right.
We're going way back to those Americans who decided to make a life, build a career
Yeah.
in this really booming British colony.
It's a fascinating side of history I think we often miss.
Yeah.
Right? Like we talk about 19th century globalization.
Yeah.
But it's easy to slip into a very Eurocentric view.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the American story in Hong Kong adds a whole other layer of complexity.
Absolutely. And we have, thankfully, the China firm to guide us on this deep dive.
Yeah.
And get into the nitty-gritty of what life was like for these folks, especially those involved with Augustin Herd and Company,
Right.
which was a major player in the American trading scene.
Absolutely.
So we're thinking cultural adaptation, clashing ambitions,
Yeah.
the whole challenge of what it means to build a life in a place that must felt strangely familiar, yet completely foreign.
Yeah, reading this, it's almost like, those House Hunter shows? But instead of like, open floor plans and granite countertops, we're talking about like opium shipments and trying to get an invite to, the right social gathering.
I love that analogy. And just like those shows, location is everything.
Absolutely.
So, first question, why Hong Kong? What made these Americans in the 1800s decide to cross the entire globe and set up shop there?
Well, I mean, the surface answer is pretty obvious, right? Money.
Right.
Hong Kong was like the Wall Street of its day. It was this global trade hub,
Yeah.
just absolutely buzzing with opportunity.
Okay.
But if we dig a little deeper, it gets, I think, way more interesting than just chasing a quick fortune.
Okay, let's unpack that. So besides maybe the promise of striking it rich, what else drew them in?
Well, so we have to remember those old Canton factories.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially these were walled off trading posts, right?
Yeah.
For Western merchants in China. But in 1857, these factories were destroyed,
Oh.
which forced everyone to relocate. And this move to Hong Kong was a game changer, and not everyone was thrilled about it.
So were Americans hesitant to kind of fully embrace life in Hong Kong at first?
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely this this perception of Hong Kong as this temporary gig,
Yeah.
place to make a quick buck, and then, set sail back to Boston with a shipload of tea and silk.
Mm-hmm.
But as the decades passed, something interesting happened.
Let me guess. They started putting down roots.
Exactly. It became more than just a business venture. It became home.
Yeah.
And what's the first thing you do when a place starts to feel like home?
Yeah.
You make it your own, right?
Right.
These merchants began constructing these elaborate houses,
Yeah.
almost like these mini New England mansions,
Yeah.
but with this distinct colonial flair.
And the book really dives into these details of these houses, and it's fascinating how they tried to recreate their lives from back home, from across the world.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they were shipping in everything imaginable.
Oh,
Barrels of baked beans, subscriptions to their favorite magazines,
wow.
even special orders for this fancy mineral water from New York called Congress water.
Wow.
Can you imagine the logistics?
Talk about commitment.
I know, right?
It seems like they were really determined to create this little slice of America on the other side of the globe.
Yeah.
But at the same time, they were stepping into this completely different social scene.
Oh, absolutely. Imagine this world of lavish dinner parties.
Okay.
Jockeying for membership at these exclusive clubs like the prestigious Hong Kong Club,
Yeah.
which, by the way, had very, very strict rules.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And this constant pressure to maintain a certain image.
It does that, yeah, like a far cry from those stereotypical images of the frugal Yankee, that's for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Speaking of stereotypes, the book mentions something called China Punch.
Yes.
What in the world is that?
Ugh. China Punch. So think of it as the satirical magazine of the colony,
Okay.
like a 19th century Hong Kong version of The Onion.
Okay.
They poked fun at everything and everyone, particularly the social climbers and the hypocrisies of the foreign elite.
Oh, I bet they had a field day with this mix of cultures and personalities all trying to outdo each other.
Oh, absolutely.
But it wasn't just the men making waves, right? The book also mentioned the role of women in all this.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This was not just a boys' club.
Her.
American women played a huge role in shaping this community.
Yeah.
And their experiences are just as fascinating, full of their own, challenges and triumphs.
All right, so we have ambitious merchants.
Yeah.
We have their families trying to make a life for themselves in this new land. A healthy dose of social satire.
Right.
Where do we go from here?
Well, it's important to remember that behind this facade of, these grand dinner parties and this striving for status,
Right.
there were some serious tensions brewing beneath the surface.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
What kind of tensions are we talking about?
Well, for one, many of these Americans found themselves wrestling with their own national identity.
Okay.
They might have embraced many aspects of colonial life, but events back home, like the U.S. Civil War, had this huge ripple effect on their relationships,
yeah.
especially with their British counterparts.
I can only imagine how awkward those 4th of July celebrations must have been in a British colony.
Oh, tell me about it.
Especially with this potential for conflict, with the U.S. and Britain always looming in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. But those external political tensions were just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
The Americans also grappled with some internal moral contradictions as well, particularly when it came to, how they were making their fortunes.
You mean their involvement in the opium trade?
Exactly. Here they were, trying to present themselves as morally superior to the British, yet deeply entangled in the very trade that they often criticized. Talk about a complicated situation.
It definitely adds another layer of nuance to the image of these early American pioneers in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
It's not as simple as good versus bad, or black and white.
Not at all. And that's what makes this deep dive so captivating, right?
Yeah.
It challenges us to confront this messy reality of history. Pushing past easy answers to get this more complete and, I think, honest picture of the past.
And what's great about the China firm is it doesn't shy away from these difficult topics.
Right. And it doesn't just talk about these tensions in some abstract way.
Right.
It digs into real-life examples of how these tensions played out in their daily lives, often with dramatic consequences.
Okay, give us an example. How did these moral dilemmas and political tensions actually manifest in their day-to-day lives?
Well, take the case of Joseph Coolidge,
Okay.
one of the founding partners of Gufton Herd and Company. During the First Opium War, he got caught up in this legal battle with the British over some confiscated goods.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It caused quite a scandal in the foreign community.
A scandal during the Opium War. Now that's what I call a juicy historical tidbit. Tell us more. What happened with Coolidge and the British?
Well, you see, Coolidge was demanding compensation for losses he'd incurred during the war.
Okay.
Even though the British believed he was trying to profit from their military actions while claiming neutrality. It became this whole debate about American opportunism and hypocrisy, with the British press in Canton even accusing him of parasitic behavior.
So there was already this underlying resentment towards the Americans for wanting to, have it both ways, like benefiting from British power but not taking any responsibility.
Exactly. The British saw it as the Americans trying to reap the rewards of their empire without paying any of the dues.
Right.
And Coolidge's case brought those tensions to the forefront.
And what happened to Coolidge after all this went down? Did he get his compensation?
It's not entirely clear from the book how the situation was ultimately resolved.
Okay.
But we do know Coolidge ended up leaving China soon after. His partnership with Augustin Herd and Company also dissolved. So it doesn't sound like he found that quick fortune he was hoping for.
Yeah, not the ending he had in mind.
No.
But as you said, Coolidge's story isn't just about one man and his misfortune.
Right.
It speaks to these larger power dynamics and simmering resentments within the foreign community.
Right. And it gets even more complicated.
Okay.
There's this other fascinating case in the book this time involving George Dixwell,
Okay.
another partner at Augustin Herd and Company.
What did he get up to?
Well, during the First Opium War, he was actually sent to Macau
Okay.
to learn the ins and outs of the opium trade from the British firm Jardine Matheson and Company.
Hold on. They sent an American to essentially get schooled in the opium trade
Yes.
by the very people they were supposedly morally opposed to.
It really shows how, for many, profit often trumped moral objections, even when it came to something as controversial as opium.
Yeah.
And Dixwell ended up becoming quite successful in the trade,
Wow.
even establishing direct contacts with opium suppliers in India.
It makes you question how genuine that American neutrality really was.
Right.
Was it just a convenient facade?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's a question that kept popping up, not just with individuals like Coolidge and Dixwell, but with the American government as a whole.
Right.
The Second Opium War, the Taiping Rebellion, even the U.S. Civil War back home, all these events tested the limits of American neutrality and exposed these often conflicting interests at play. The U.S. government, the merchants themselves, and of course the Chinese.
So how did these American merchants navigate such a complex and constantly changing landscape?
They had to be adaptable, constantly making these strategic choices to protect their interests.
Right.
Sometimes that meant forging alliances with the British. Sometimes it meant working with the Chinese. It was this constant dance of shifting power dynamics and strategic maneuvering.
Sounds like they were walking a tightrope, trying to balance their own ambitions with their national loyalties and, at least on the surface, some semblance of a moral compass.
Exactly. And their stories remind us that history is rarely black and white.
Right.
These American merchants weren't necessarily heroes or villains.
Right.
They were people making difficult choices in a rapidly changing world, just trying to find their place and make their mark.
And speaking of making their mark, what ultimately became of these American pioneers in Hong Kong as the 19th century drew to a close?
Yeah.
Did they all pack up their fortunes and head back to Boston to live out their days in mansions, sipping tea from their china sets?
Some did. The book mentions many returning home, their homes filled with Chinese art and furnishings.
Right.
Tangible reminders of their lives abroad. They invested their wealth, becoming pillars of high society in places like Boston and New York.
The classic rags to riches story, but with a global twist.
Exactly. But for others, the transition back to life in America wasn't so simple.
Yeah.
Some found it hard to reintegrate after spending years in a completely different world.
Yeah, I can imagine going from a life of servants and exotic luxuries to the realities of everyday life in Boston might be a bit of a culture shock, even for those returning with a fortune.
Right. And then there's another layer to this story we haven't even touched on yet. The children. Specifically, those merchants who had children with Chinese women.
You're right. The book mentions protected women and Eurasian children, which adds a whole new dimension to this already complex story. What became of these families?
That's right. We can't forget about those families. It's one thing for these merchants to build a life for themselves.
Yeah.
But their children born into this unique situation faced a whole other set of challenges, didn't they?
Absolutely. And their experiences, I think, really highlight this human side of this history.
Yeah.
You know, some of these children were raised within Chinese communities while others were sent abroad for education.
Often finding themselves, caught between two worlds, two cultures.
Right.
Imagine trying to reconcile those different upbringings.
Yeah.
Those different expectations in a society that, frankly, wasn't always accepting of mixed heritage.
It's a stark reminder of the complexities of cultural exchange and these very human consequences of globalization. Even back then, it wasn't just about, the tea and the silk. It was about the lives intertwined with those goods.
Yeah.
The families created the legacies built.
Precisely. And speaking of legacies, let's talk about, those who did return to the U.S., fortunes in hand.
Right.
Did they simply fade into the background?
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about.
Right.
Did their experiences in Hong Kong change them? Did they bring anything back besides souvenirs and stories?
That's the fascinating part. Many didn't just retire to their mansions. They took their experiences and applied them to new endeavors.
Okay.
Take John Hurd, for example, one of the founding brothers of Augustin Hurd and Company.
Right.
He became quite a prominent figure in politics, even serving as the mayor of Boston.
Wow, from Hong Kong merchant to the mayor of Boston. That's quite a journey.
Right.
What about his brother, Augustine Hurd Jr.?
So Augustine Jr. continued to be involved in international affairs.
Okay.
Even serving as the American minister to Korea.
Really?
Can you imagine the perspective he brought to that role?
Right.
Having navigated these complexities of trade and diplomacy in Asia for decades?
It seems like these brothers weren't content to simply, rest on their laurels.
Yeah.
They were still driven, ambitious, eager to make a difference even after their, trading days were over.
Absolutely. And their later careers, I think, really demonstrate this lasting influence of their time in Hong Kong. They brought this global perspective, this sharp business acumen, a network of international contacts to everything they did.
Right.
It's a testament to how those formative experiences in Hong Kong really shaped their trajectory.
Right. Yeah, it really makes you think about the ripple effect of their experiences.
Right.
It wasn't just a chapter in their lives, it was like a catalyst for their futures. And it speaks to this transformative power of stepping outside your comfort zone, of immersing yourself in a different culture.
Absolutely.
These men weren't just trading goods, they were exchanging ideas, perspectives, ways of life.
Right.
And those exchanges left an indelible mark.
Yeah.
Not just on them, but on the world around them.
Precisely. And that brings us, I think, to an important point. The skills and the knowledge.
Okay.
These merchants acquired in Hong Kong, they weren't limited to the world of trade.
Right.
They learned to navigate complex cultural differences, negotiate deals, build relationships, adapt to these constantly shifting circumstances. These were invaluable life skills applicable no matter where they ended up.
It's like they went through a real-world MBA program long before such a thing existed.
I know, right?
A crash course in global diplomacy and business strategy with incredibly high stakes.
Exactly. Imagine having to be a quick study, a strategic thinker, a master of diplomacy,
Yeah.
all while operating thousands of miles from home
Right.
in a completely different cultural context. And these skills weren't just theoretical.
Right.
They were honed through real-life challenges and triumphs.
Right.
So it's no wonder that many of them went on to achieve success in other fields. But there's one more aspect of their legacy that I think is particularly noteworthy:
Go on.
their philanthropy.
Okay.
The China firm highlights this significant charitable work.
Okay.
Many of these merchants undertook, both back in the U.S. and in China. They used their wealth to establish schools and hospitals, support libraries.
Wow.
They even contributed to the founding of Harvard's first business school.
That's incredible. It really speaks to a different side of these merchants, a sense of social responsibility that went beyond simply amassing wealth. They recognized that their success was intertwined with the well-being of the communities they were a part of, both in Hong Kong and back home. It adds another layer to how we view their legacy, don't you think?
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even amidst, the complexities of colonialism,
Yeah.
the drive for profit, and these often murky realities of international trade, there was still room for compassion, for a desire to give back and make a positive impact on the world.
It's a reminder that history is full of contradictions.
Yeah.
That individuals are rarely easily categorized.
Right.
But their stories, those nuances, those contradictions, that's where the real learning happens, wouldn't you say?
Couldn't agree more. Their experiences challenge us to see beyond, these simplistic narratives, to recognize the agency individuals had even within these larger systems like colonialism and globalization. And these weren't just passive players caught in the current of history.
Right.
They were actively shaping their destinies and, in many ways, influencing the world around them.
Exactly. And their story is far from over, right? We've followed them from the bustling ports of Hong Kong to the corridors of power in Boston, even diplomatic missions in Korea.
Right.
It really highlights how interconnected the world was becoming, even back then.
Absolutely. And these merchants were at the forefront of that change. They understood firsthand the importance of cultural exchange, diplomacy, this need to build bridges across differences. And these weren't just abstract concepts for them.
Right.
They were living and breathing these realities every single day.
This deep dive has really been an eye-opener. We've uncovered hidden histories, delved into cultural clashes, even chuckled over some vintage China Punch satire.
It's amazing.
But at its heart, I think this deep dive into the China firm has really been about the power of individual stories to illuminate this much bigger picture.
I completely agree.
What did you say?
It reminds us that history isn't just this collection of dates and events.
Right.
It's a tapestry woven from the lives of real people. People with flaws and ambitions.
Right.
Who made choices that rippled outward, shaping not only their own destinies, but the very course of history.
So as you continue to explore this fascinating world we've uncovered in the China firm,
Right.
I'm curious, what resonates most strongly with you?
Yeah.
What questions does this raise about American identity, about cultural exchange, or the complexities of globalization in the 19th century?
It's a big question.
Keep those questions in mind, because with a story this rich, this surprising, I think you'll find there's always more to discover.